Good evening, everyone. My name is Shirley McCormick, and I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of the Harrisburg area. And on behalf of the League, I welcome you and I thank you for joining us tonight. It's very important topics, two topics. One, fair districts and the gerrymandering issue. And with us this evening to talk about that is Jean Handley, whom we've been talking to briefly before starting to record. Jean was born in Pittsburgh and has been a lifelong resident of Pennsylvania. She currently resides in Harrisburg. She retired from professional life, but has been the Dauphin County Coordinator for Fair Districts since March of 2017. Fair Districts is a nonpartisan, all-volunteer coalition of Pennsylvania citizens working for congressional and state legislative redistricting reform to establish a more transparent and accountable process and put an end to gerrymandering in Pennsylvania. She has a BA from Gettysburg College and a master's in education from Kutztown with a concentration in secondary school counseling. She was a guidance counselor, and I always enjoy this part, a professional airline captain and ground instructor. So we're very fortunate to have her with us to talk about gerrymandering. As I was telling, since nobody else has come on, League of Women Voters has been a huge supporter of fair districts and how district lines are being drawn. In the second portion of this evening, as we've dubbed it a double header, Carole Dascani will be talking about bills that are currently in the Pennsylvania legislature relative to voting in some manner or the other, affecting the way we do our voting process. And there are currently 33 bills in the legislature. That just kind of blew me away. Carole is a retired attorney and business executive. She's a member of the League of Women Voters of the Harrisburg area, and she leads our league's youth voter registration efforts. She also tracks voting legislation, which is why she's speaking tonight, for our league, and she is a judge of elections in Dauphin County. So we're going to start the program, and there is a chat room, as you can see. Down at the bottom, if you've ever done a Zoom, and I can't believe there is anybody in the world who has not done a Zoom. Are you all seeing a chat room down there? Because I'm not right now. Is everybody seeing a chat room or not?
No.
And that's my fault. If you have a question, because May, for your information, I thought I fixed that, but obviously I didn't. We had the chat room shut down because we did a candidates forum last week, and I thought I had reinstalled it. If you have a question, since we can see all of you, you can raise your hand, I think, in a thing down.
Yeah, under reactions.
On the reactions, and we'll recognize you, unmute yourself, and you ask us your question, if you will. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jean Handley to talk to us about redistricting.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Shirley and May, for inviting me back to talk about redistricting. And in the intro that Shirley gave, it pretty much describes fair districts, and probably most of you are somewhat familiar with it anyway. But as we're nonpartisan, and we are just trying to get more transparency and fairness and accountability in the process. Tonight, what I'm going to do, because this is a redistricting year, there's a good movie that was produced by a gentleman by the name of Robert Millman. And so I've been asked to show that movie and then have a little bit of, I'm going to give you a summary of some of the legislation that is in the General Assembly now. So we'll kind of run it that way. And once again, if you have a question, if you can hold it kind of till we get to the Q&A part, write it down or whatever, but hold it. And then we've got, since we're a small group, we can answer that pretty easily as far as for my part. So on that note, let me share my screen. And let me get up here. Well, let me go previous slide. So as far as the redistricting process, as I said, every census year, there is or every 10 years, there's a new census, federal census. And so that drives the fact that we have to do redistricting on the following year. And this obviously is the year to do that. And we are kind of running out of time to get that done, but it will be done. And one of the things I want to just mention here is that nobody knows what congressional or state senate or state representative district that you're going to be in for the next decade. Have no clue. You could be in the same district you are now, you may not. And as Shirley said, we're going to lose a congressional district, so that's going to change some things. So this next 10 months of redistricting process is going to shape the Pennsylvania maps and thus the politics and the policy for the next 10 years and beyond. Because once these maps are drawn, they go for a decade. And so the movie that I'm going to show talks about some of the process that went through. And if you remember, there was a League of Women Voters with 18 plaintiffs, Supreme Court case that was won that would challenge the congressional districts in the way that they were done in 2011. And that's what this primarily deals with. It will talk a little bit about some of the state legislative, but I'll get into a little bit more after the movie. So on that note, let me hope that this works.
I think there's an audio problem.
Okay. Jean, are you talking, or we're not hearing you?
No,
Okay, so
I'm not hearing the film.
right.
you're not.
No.
Oh no, this is not good. Well, I wonder why.
But you should be hearing it on your machine, correct?
I am. I'm hearing it myself. It's just not.
It's not going over the Zoom. Oh, try
Going
that.
over the Zoom. That's weird. Sorry about that. I'll just end this for a second here then.
Okay.
This might make the program much shorter, because if this isn't going to play, and I do not know why it will not play, I can try it one more time and see, but I just don't know. And the volume is up.
Oop, no, it just went down. Yeah.
Let me try this. No, I don't want that. Let's try it again. Are you hearing that?
No.
No.
Okay.
And please accept our apologies. Before you all got on, we did test this in that we saw that we could bring the picture up. We did not test the audio part, and I apologize for that. We should have.
And I have to get back to you guys because there we go. I gotta stop it because I can hear this guy, and I have to stop my screen share.
Yes.
Can you see anything on the screen
At the moment,
other
no.
than me?
No, we
Okay.
have all the dots with everybody, all the faces right now. That's what's up.
Okay. All right. There we go. No, I don't know why it's not playing. Well,
Then
I will improvise here, people, if it's okay with you. And I will pull this back up, except that I will start it at a different place in the program. And Nah, stop. Do not want that. We're going there. Okay, as far as gerrymandering, we in Pennsylvania, we have one of the worst gerrymandered states in the country. And as far as the League of Women Voters case, if you remember anything about that at all, it challenged the congressional districts that were drawn in 2011. And it was the first case that ever used a state constitution to challenge redistricting. So it's a landmark case. And it was decided in favor of the League and the plaintiffs. And the Supreme Court said that it was clearly, plainly, and palpably a violation of the state constitution, and that it violated the Free and Fair Elections Clause. And it was a demonstration of viewpoint discrimination. And so at that point, they were required to redraw the districts. And so they redrew the 18 congressional districts that we have in the state now, and it became much more fairer districts. They were more compact. They had to be contiguous anyway, but they were more compact. And so it was, as I said, a landmark case that helped the process of gerrymandering for the congressional districts, but it was not a permanent kind of thing. And the process will go back to the exact same process that it presently is, unless legislation is passed to change the way that the districts are drawn, or to put some guardrails on it. And as you all know, I'm sure by now, the gerrymandering is the drawing of districts that favors a political party or favors a particular candidate. And so because we do redistricting, or because we do reapportionment for the 435 seats of Congress after every decennial census, that requires the districts to be redrawn because population dictates that. And so, and every district has to be just about equal in population across the country. And so they redraw these districts. And the districts are drawn not only for congressional districts, but most of the states, including Pennsylvania, redraw their state legislative districts at the same time. Normally I would have a slide up for this, but I don't right now. But I think it's important because it ties into the legislation that we are going to be discussing here shortly, that you understand the process by which they draw these districts, because the process for congressional districts is a totally different process than the state legislative districts, our General Assembly, House, and Senate districts. And so I will cover the congressional ones first. And this is kind of a simple version of it. Hopefully it's easy to understand. But when they draw congressional districts, the way that they do that is the majority party, for the most part, draws up a simple bill and submits it to the legislature, to the Senate, if it's in the Senate, or if they bring it up in the House. But in any event, it's introduced into the General Assembly. And it goes through the normal bill process. And then the Senate votes on it. And if it passes by a majority, it passes the Senate. And then the House would vote on it. And if it passes in the majority, with a majority vote in the House, then the bill has passed and it goes to the governor. And the governor at that point has two choices. The governor can either veto the bill or they can approve the bill. And if they approve the bill, it becomes the new congressional district maps. If they veto the bill, it goes back to the General Assembly. And then they work on it and try to come up with something that the governor will approve. Interestingly enough, that I did not know this until recently, if they cannot come up with a new map that the governor would approve, all of the candidates have to run statewide. They do not run in districts. That's just a kind of a fun fact, I guess, if you will. But I did not know that. Now they will come up with something, but something just to stick in the back of your mind. So that's how they do the congressional districts. Simple bill, governor approval, becomes the maps. The state legislative districts are totally different. And how the state legislative districts are drawn is that there is a 5-member commission called the Legislative Reapportionment Commission that is made up of the majority and the minority party leaders in the Senate, and the same thing in the House. So now you have 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats. You have the they can appoint people, they can have their designees, but those are the principles that are involved in it. And they are charged with picking the 5th person, which is a chairman. And that chairman cannot be an elected official, federal or local or state elected official. And they have to be a resident of Pennsylvania, a citizen of Pennsylvania. So those 5 people draw the maps. And there is no governor's approval. There is no vote in the General Assembly for those maps. It's whatever they draw, and then there might be a hearing, hearings, public hearings that people can make a comment, but basically the maps are the maps. And this whole process has very little transparency and accountability and public input. It is basically nothing at the present time. So why I went through that is because, as I said, it's important that if you understand that, because we're going to talk about the legislation very shortly here. In the past, a little bit of history here. Over the past 2 legislative sessions, 2017 and 18 and 2019 and 20. You can see up here, I'm finally getting to some of my slides, you have some bills, HB 22, 722 and SB 22 in the 17-18 session. And those were bills that we supported, and they had huge support, legislator support. I think there was 110 co-sponsors for SB or HB 722, and there was a lot of co-sponsors for SB 22. Those bills, they were the exact same bill, but one was in the House and one was in the Senate. And what they required, or what they were trying to do was change the Constitution, the Pennsylvania Constitution, to create an independent citizens commission to do the redistricting and take it out of the hands of the legislators. And so it would be more transparent process, what some people considered, many people consider to be a fair process, etc. Those bills never got a final vote. And in some cases, they never even got out of committee. And SB 22 did get out of committee, but HB 722 did not. And then in the 1920 session, these bills, HB 22 and 23 and SB 1022 and 1023, were introduced. And what those actually were was they took these bills and split them into 2. In other words, rather than trying to do the state legislative and the congressional districts all in one bill, what they did was they split them, and the state legislative districts were in one bill, and the congressional districts were in another bill. But they were also trying to get an independent citizens commission. So once again, these bills went nowhere. And so that was a little bit of the history. And what happened is at the end of last year, well, basically in June, late June, early July of last year, time ran out to get a constitutional amendment, because the constitutional amendment process requires the same bill or the same wording of a bill to go through 2 successive legislative sessions and voted upon. And then if it passes in 2 successive legislative sessions with no change in the language at all, no amending or anything, then it would go on the ballot for the voters to approve or not approve. Well, that whole process, we ran out of time, and the legislatures did not vote on the bills. And so that essentially killed that, that possibility. And so what happened is at the end, in June and July of last year, they introduced HB 2638 and SB 1242, which is, we affectionately call it LACRA. And actually that is the name. It's the Legislative and Congressional Redistricting Act. And that is what these bills are called. They are the same. They were the same bill, except one was in the House and one was in the Senate. And what those bills were criteria-based bills. And what I mean by that, I will get to very shortly. But once again, nothing was given a vote. So essentially, by the end of last session, we had not gotten anything. And so this session, we are back with the Legislative and Congressional Redistricting Act, LACRA. And the bill was introduced into the House by Representative Wendy Thomas, a Republican from down in the Philadelphia area, and in the Senate by Senator Lisa Vascola, who is a Democratic senator from up in the Allentown area. Wendy Thomas, by the way, was the one that was the prime sponsor of LACRA that didn't pass last time. And Senator Lisa Vascola has been a constant and fervent prime sponsor or co-sponsor of redistricting bills for years. And they're back at it. And as I said, these are transparency and criteria-based bills to promote accountability. The legislator roles remain the same. And that is why I went through that whole process to say the congressional districts are done this way and the state legislative districts are done this way. Because you need to understand that those roles are going to stay the same. There's not an independent citizens commission. It's going to be the same people, or if you will, drawing the lines. However, because of the transparency and criteria that requirements that are imposed upon them, it would be much more accountable and much more public input. One of the things that may make this an easier task to get past is that because of that very nature, the last time around, a lot of the legislators, because the US Constitution says that the state legislators are the ones that have the responsibility and the authority to redraw the districts. A lot of the legislators said, wait a second, an independent citizens commission, you're going to take this away from us. And so we don't buy into this. Well, now that cannot be said because they will be in the process. So in some ways that may become a plus. You will only need a constitutional majority or a simple majority, if you will, in each chamber to pass. That also makes it a little bit easier, or a lot easier maybe, because it does not have to go through that whole constitutional amendment process of going through 2 consecutive sessions. It's a simple bill, basically. Now, as far as currently, as of right before I got on this Zoom, we have 68 co-sponsors on HB 22 and 18 co-sponsors on SB 222, and they are bipartisan co-sponsors. As far as HB 22, there are 47 Democrats and 21 Republicans on that bill right now, and we just got 3 more today, which is we are getting more every day, which is great. On SB 222, there are 18, as I said, and I believe there are 12 Democrats, 5 Republicans, and 1 independent on that bill right now. And those bills are currently in their respective state government committees. Once again, I will reiterate that they are the exact same bill, it's just that one's in the House and one's in the Senate, and whoever gets there first is going to be, we don't care, just so as one of them passes. So they are currently in the respective state government committees and awaiting action on that, awaiting hearings.
Can I ask a question?
A quick summary of some of this stuff. I said it's a transparency and criteria-based bill. Transparency and public engagement.
Am I not? Jean, can I
Some
ask
of
you a
the things, the
question?
requirements in the bills are that this, there's an entity called the Legislative Data Processing Commission, I believe it is. And it's a bipartisan it's a bipartisan office within the General Assembly that is responsible for a lot of data, okay? And collecting data and processing data and storing data, etc. Well, they will be now, they are the ones that put up the website now, but they would also now be required to develop a very user-friendly website for dissemination of all the data that is used in the redistricting process, and that is not currently done. It would be a website where the proposed maps would be published on it. Public comments would be put on it. Also, there are requirements for hearings. I think it's a minimum of 4 hearings in all parts of the state prior to the preliminary maps for both the state legislative redistricting maps and also for the congressional redistricting maps. And all of that would be on that website. Those meetings would be on there. And they are charged with being able to live stream these meetings so that you could interact during the meeting and actually give your comments there on the website. Or if written comments were submitted, they would be in there. So it's a tremendous amount of transparency now and public input that would be on that website. Another thing about the
Jean?
maps, anyone can submit a map. I could submit a map, you could submit a map. There are people, there have been contests by an organization called Draw the Lines, which is an offshoot, or it's a child of the Committee of 70, good government group out of Philadelphia. And they have been doing map drawing for the last 4 years. And all of the software is there. And if you go to drawthelines.org, if you are so inclined to draw maps, you can get all the software and draw your own maps. In any event, anyone can submit maps, and those maps, and I'm sure there will be some kind of criteria for it, but those maps would be considered equally as the maps the legislators are drawing, and they would be on that website. So that's another transparency thing that does not exist right now. And as I mentioned, there will be multiple statewide hearings prior to the preliminary maps being drawn, and then after the preliminary maps would be drawn, so that there would be public comment. And there would be adequate notice that these meetings would be happening so that people could do that. In this age of Zoom, it makes it a lot easier because you can be in any portion of the state and attend a meeting. You don't have to be there in person. So that's some of the transparency and public engagement. There is also clear measurable criteria for map drawing. Presently, the Pennsylvania Constitution requires compactness and contiguity for the state legislative districts, and that you cannot unnecessarily split townships and municipalities and wards and boroughs and counties. That does not apply to the congressional districts at this particular point in time, because the Constitution, the PA Constitution, doesn't cover how the congressional districts are drawn. This bill would make sure that the compactness and contiguity requirements for the state legislative districts are also applied to the congressional districts. And then there would be a limit on splitting counties more than necessary. And also there would be a prohibition in splitting voting precincts, as I mentioned up here, and then against drawing districts to favor or discriminate against a person or a party. And there are measures out there that the experts in these fields have developed that you can actually test that to see whether it is kind of partisan bias in that. Secondary criteria, those are some of the primary criteria. And if you go to our website, fairdistrictspa.com, you can get into the nitty-gritty of this. I'm just kind of summarizing some of the stuff, and you can get into the summaries of it, or you can actually get to the bills. But secondary criteria, if they, to the extent possible that they will be able to consider it, one of the things is to try to keep communities of interest intact. And those, when we talk about communities of interest, because this is kind of a sticking point for a lot of legislators, they want to know what's a community of interest. Well, a community of interest is they have cultural or social or economic interests that are the same, that maybe would have legislation that would be pertinent to them. It does not mean that people are for a particular political party or political candidate or that kind of thing. It's not that. It is communities of interest that are having to do with, as I said, cultural or economic or ethnic potential interests that are similar. The other thing is that, if possible, respond to voter preferences as measured by widely accepted tests. Once again, the experts have come up with tests to measure this. And basically what that means is that if you have a census block or a group of people that they have the ability to make their preferences known and have a good chance of having those preferences elect the candidate they want. Certainly not guaranteed, but and so it's kind of like the outcome reflects what the voters really wanted. Okay. And then conform districts to natural boundaries like rivers and mountains, etc. There are a lot of districts, congressional and state legislative districts in Pennsylvania, that because of mountains or rivers or certain natural boundaries kind of separate or make it very, very difficult to get around the district or for you to go see your representative or your senator or whatever. And to the extent possible, they would try to conform to some of the natural boundaries and rivers. I'll give you an example of that. District 48, which is Lebanon, Senate District 48, which is Lebanon, Lower Dauphin County, and part of York County, Eastern York County. There is no way to get to the York part of that district. There is no bridge that connects it within the district. You have to go into someone else's district in order to get to a bridge that will take you across the river. And that's not a good deal. And a lot of times, and in the case of that particular district, the people in the York part of the district may not have the same interests. We're talking about community of interest. They may not have the same interests or priorities as the people on the other side of the river. So a little bit about the natural boundaries. And by the way, there is a river crossing event on the 29th. Some people from Fair Districts and the League of Women Voters will be kayaking across the river to demonstrate the fact that the only way that you can get to one side to the other side in that district is across the river or by airplane or something like that. A few words about timing. A lot of people are concerned about the census because it is late. The US Census Bureau data the rough data came out today, and that's how Shirley mentioned that we're going to be losing a congressional seat. We know that now. But the data that is used to draw the districts will not be here to our legislature until September the 30th or thereabouts. It's going to be late, which obviously compresses the timeline for completing redistricting before the next election cycle. And we have to have that information. We have to have the districts drawn because we're losing a congressional seat. It has to be done. Now, the Pennsylvania Constitution for the state legislative districts gives that LRC, that Legislative Redistricting Commission, 5 months normally to approve a preliminary plan and consider objections and hold hearings and approve a final plan. But it is not required to take that long. So that if you start planning now and getting some of this stuff done, when the data hits, you can just draw the maps and you don't have to go through all of this other stuff. So most of those LAPR requirements for transparency and hearings and those kinds of things can be met and a final plan completed by the end of 2021 or very early in the next year, 2022. which would mean that you really don't have to push primary elections or that kind of thing. Or if you do, it's minimal. And as I said, we're going to have new maps, at least for congressional, by the 2022 primary, because we're losing a seat. We're going to 17 seats. So the point is, start now and don't wait for deadlines. Well, there is some encouraging kinds of things there. SB 441, it's a bill that has been introduced. The prime sponsor was Senator David Argyle, who, by the way, is the chair of the Senate State Government Committee, where LWVHA resides right now. He introduced a bill, SB 441, that has to do with the LRC chairman qualifications, and put much more stringent qualifications on the LRC chairman than there is right now. For example, you cannot have been a lobbyist, or your wife or your husband could not have been a lobbyist or registered as a lobbyist for 5 years preceding when they were appointed, and you could not hold political office. And I mean, there was a number of requirements that are really good requirements. Essentially, what Senator Argyle did was lifted that piece of SB 222 or HB 22 out of that bill and put it in as a separate, smaller bill. And it was introduced on the 17th of March, and then it was passed unanimously by the committee on the 23rd. And it now resides, it has not been voted upon. I don't think they've had consideration, second or third considerations on it. But that would be a step in the right direction. Certainly not what all we would like to see, but it is a start. And we'll see where that ends up. The LRC for the state legislative districts. I'm not going to read all of this to you, but the four principles, the majority leader of the House and the Senate and the minority leaders of the House and the Senate have made statements regarding the choosing of the LRC chair. And by the way, the LRC chair, they have got to pick somebody. Those four people have got to come up with a consensus on picking somebody by Friday, because if they don't pick them by Friday, it will go to the state Supreme Court, and the state Supreme Court will then select out of candidates, I believe, they will select the fifth person. So it's important that they get this done, and they have all made public statements saying that they are in favor of someone that is a fair and transparent and open and a neutral arbiter, and they want to ensure we draw maps that provide fair representation. And Joanna McClinton has said, I'm seeking a chairperson who shares my commitment to ensure that power remains in the hands of voters. So these people are on record making public statements to that, and hopefully they will adhere to that. And you know, we have our fingers crossed on that. So the deadline is April the 30th, and they have had hearings. Today was the first meeting. I don't want to say hearing. Today was the first meeting to interview candidates for that, and tomorrow they will do that again. And then, as I said, they have, hopefully we'll choose somebody by Friday. If not, it goes to the state Supreme Court. I go back to Senator Argyle for a second, because he is the chair of the Senate State Government Committee, and he has an awful lot of influence on what happens, at least in his committee, to the Senate bill anyway. And interestingly enough, he was a prime sponsor of 7 House bills when he was in the House between 1986 and 1997, dealing with redistricting. And his was much narrower in scope and in focus, but he was concentrating at the time on splitting of political subdivisions and communities of interest. He was concerned about keeping those intact, and the topography and artificial and natural boundaries. So that was a big thing that he was interested in. And he has also made public statements recently, and he's said that they have committed for congressional districts, because his committee is only responsible for congressional districts, and the House committee also. But his committee will hold a series of hearings on the process of redrawing congressional districts, as required by our Constitution before passing the necessary legislation. So they have committed to having hearings. That is also a good sign because that is not necessarily what has happened in the past. And then Senator Street, who is the minority chair of that same committee, has noted, he's noted the importance of bipartisan working together, and they want to make sure that they draw good maps. So this is a good sign, but we'll see. A couple of things I just want to mention here. This is our website. It's fairdistrictspa.com. And a lot of the stuff that I've talked about and much more, if you want to do research, is on this website. And if you click on any one of these things, they will give you drop-down menus, or they will take you to different pages where you can learn a tremendous amount of information about this. It gives you ways to take action. It gives you, the bills. It gives you a tremendous amount of research. It gives you, you can order if you go to, I believe it's shop, or it's under take action also, you can order postcards that are free and you can send them in. It tells you how to write letters to the editor because they are extremely important, or to do op-eds, and it gives you some examples. So my point is, on the website, there is a really tremendous amount of information that is good and it would be helpful for you. You can sign the petition too by joining us if you do the join us. A couple of events that Shirley, I believe, already mentioned are the Capital Steps Day of Action. This is under the events page on that website. We would love to have you join us. If you want to sign up, you still can do that. It's on the 28th. It starts at noon. It won't probably go till 2 p.m., but we will have speakers and we will have some marchers. The march is already filled up. We're limited on that, but they'll be marching from the City Island over, and then we'll all join on the Capitol steps, and then we'll have some speakers, and there'll be information there and lots of different things going on. And then the Susquehanna River crossing, which I mentioned, Senate District 48, on Thursday, the 29th, and that starts at 10:45. And if you want, you don't have to kayak, but you can certainly join. They'll have press conferences, I believe, on either side of the river. And that is also in the events section on the website, if you want more information or want to sign up for that. And so I'm sorry that the movie didn't play. I apologize for that, but I have tried to give you some summary of where the bills are and what we're doing and where this is going. One of the things I will mention as far as LACRA, it really needs to be passed, either HB 22 or SB 222, for those provisions to be put in place for the current redistricting process by the end of June or the beginning of July. So we are in what we call the sprint phase of our marathon at this point. And so we value your support if you want to write op-eds or letters or whatever, but we have to get this done. Otherwise, we are going to be potentially 10 more years in districts that may or may not be as good as they could be. And one of the other things I will mention is that there are a lot more eyes on the process this time than there has been ever in the past. And so I believe that the legislators are aware of that, and they will hopefully keep that in mind when they are drawing the districts. So on that note, if anybody has any questions or questions, I will stop my screen share and hopefully stop share. There we go. So any questions, I will be happy to answer it, or then Carol can start.
Yes, I have a question, Jean, because
Shirley, you're muted, I think.
I'm muted. I unmuted myself. How come I'm still muted?
We can hear her, Jean. I don't know.
I can hear it. Oh, good. Jean, you can't hear me? Apparently not.
Shirley, are you muted?
No?
No, I can hear Shirley.
I cannot hear you for some reason.
That explains why you couldn't hear her before.
Yeah, because I was trying to ask a question in the middle, and
May, can you say something and maybe I can hear you?
Yeah, I'm hearing
Can't hear you either.
Oh, well, I'm hearing you.
yeah, we're hearing you. So My question will have to happen later to Jean. And you're not going to hear me thanking you either, Jean. I am saying thank you. We appreciate what you did in presenting this. It doesn't look like there are other people that have their little hand up, but me. You still can't hear me, I'm assuming, Jean.
Oh, now I can't hear Jean.
Okay, now we can't hear you at
Now
all.
we can't hear you, Jean. You're muted.
Me, I'm okay, I'm good. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry, Shirley, go ahead.
Now you can hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, you can hear me now. Okay. I got kind of confused there with what you were saying, because I thought that there needed to be a constitutional amendment to change the way they do the congressional districts, because that
No.
is in the state constitution.
No.
And the legislative districts are not
The
outlined.
legislative districts are in the Constitution.
Are in-
That is
I had it
formally,
reversed.
that's why the LRC exists, and it was established in the Constitutional Convention in 1968.
Okay. So-
The congressional districts are not, and that's
not.
how they are done by a simple bill. And that's why they can
Okay.
be changed. All of this
Okay.
can be changed by a simple bill, because we're not changing the process at all either.
Maybe.
But
We're just-
if the
Right.
one is
Come on.
outlined in the Constitution, don't I have to change the Constitution to be able to change how that's done? I
If you
have
were
the-
going to change it to an independent citizens commission, yes, Shirley, but because you're keeping the LRC,
Okay,
that's still intact, and that will still be drawing the districts for the
okay,
state legislative districts.
okay,
What happens with that? You can put restrictions on how they do it. You can put map drawing criteria. You can do all of that stuff without changing the Constitution, because you are
Okay.
keeping the LRC intact. So
okay.
that's why.
That was my confusion. So you can put parameters on them, which
Yeah.
is what your LACRA bill is trying to do
Yeah.
to
Good point.
help that
Good
thing. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Yes.
That clarified it for me. Does anyone else have questions that of Jean before we move on? So again, Jean, thank you for your presentation. It is a very important thing to ensure that we have fair districts, that we are fairly represented, and they are not drawn to the benefit of any particular group of people. And so we hope that your work continues and is successful, at least putting these parameters on this new LRC group that's meeting. Okay, thank you, Jean.
Thanks,
So we
Shirley.
move on. Yeah. We move on to Carole Dascani, who is, as I said, a member of our League of Women Voters, and she's going to talk about bills that are currently in the Pennsylvania Legislature regarding voting and changing the way voting happens. So, Carole, it's yours.
Thank you, Shirley.
Mhm.
So as is happening in many states, Pennsylvania's been very active in terms of introducing bills that have to do with how we conduct elections in the state. There have been 33 bills introduced just in 2021. 21 of them are in the Pennsylvania House and 12 are in the Senate. 20 have been introduced by Democrats and 13 by Republicans. 2 of those 33 bills have very slight bipartisan support, in that 1 or 2 legislators of the opposite party have joined on, but it's very slight, and 31 of them are completely partisan. In reviewing all of them and trying to figure out how to make sense of them, I've categorized them into those that increase access to voting, those that decrease access to voting, and those that are mixed or they're neutral from an access standpoint, not necessarily meaning that they're neutral for all purposes. They could be administratively very burdensome or something like that, but from a voter perspective, they're neutral. And I would like to please ask you to understand that those categories are my opinion. I'm sure there are some who would disagree with those categorizations, but it seemed to be the best way that we could talk about it and make sense of it tonight. The current status of the bills in the House, all of them with one exception have been referred to the House State Government Committee. This is the same state government committees in the House and Senate that Jean was talking about. The one exception is a bill that has to do with giving time off from work to vote, and that's been referred to Labor and Industry. But in the House, all of those bills are in the State Government Committee. The chair is Seth Grove from York. The committee has 15 Republicans and 10 Democrats, and I have listed the local members. Hopefully this list covers everybody that's on the call, so that if you have an opinion about any of the bills that are in the House, please do contact your legislator and express your opinion. There were 10 hearings held by the House State Government Committee. They finished on April 15th. The hearings included, frankly, a lot of expert testimony from local election officials in the counties about the conduct of elections. But of course, the hearings were rather partisan as well. If you'd like to get the full list of members of these committees, you can go onto the state legislator website to get all of the names, but these are the folks that I believe represent those of us that are on this call. In the Senate, those bills have been referred to the Senate State Government Committee. David Argall, who Jean mentioned, is the chair, 7 Republicans and 4 Democrats. There are only 2 local folks on that committee. One is Kristen Phillips Hill and the other is Doug Mastriano. The Senate did form a special committee on election integrity and reform. They have held 3 hearings. Mike Reagan from Cumberland County is the only local member. They actually put out a survey and are seeking comments from voters on their voting experience. They're also seeking comments from poll workers. And that survey is open until April 30th. So the link is there. If you would like to submit your comments, it's very easy to do. To go to PA-SEN-electioncommittee.com, and you will see right at the top of the screen a button that says submit comments. I did that, and it was not a time-consuming survey. It did ask some good questions about my experience as a voter, how I voted and how I'd like to vote, that sort of thing. So I think the more comments that they gather, the better off we will be. So this is my list of bills that I think reduce access to voting. As you'll see, there's a lot of duplication of topic. For example, the first 3 bills repeal no excuse mail-in voting. They simply eliminate that option for Pennsylvanians, which is interesting because in November of 2020, 2.6 million Pennsylvanians voted by mail. So I can hardly believe that this would be a popular bill with the citizenry of Pennsylvania. There are a couple of voter ID bills. HB 853 is probably the most stringent of those. It requires ID to vote in person, requires the election officer, the poll worker, to sign an affidavit of examination of ID in every case, which I would imagine would make the lines at the polls quite a bit longer. And it also eliminates the requirement, which is currently in the law, for PennDOT to issue ID cards free of charge. So I think that that one is probably one of the more problematic bills in terms of access to voting. There are a couple of others. The next one also requires ID. SB 322, which is the sixth one down, has to do with ballot canvassing. You may recall the brouhaha in Philadelphia and other places about observers being able to observe when ballots were being canvassed. Requires signature verification for mailed ballots. It also does require notification to the voter if there's a problem with a mailed ballot and a 6-day cure period. So that is a good thing that there's a cure period included in there. And the bill restates that 8 p.m. on election day is the receipt deadline for mailed in ballots. The next one eliminates a permanent mail-in voting list. Now, of course, we have the option of choosing to be on the permanent list, which merely gives you an application for a mail-in ballot every year. It doesn't require you to vote by mail every year. Also states that only the Department of State and the county can provide mail-in ballot applications. That particular requirement is in several of the bills. Personally, I think that that's probably a good idea. I think there was a lot of confusion last year with political parties sending mail-in ballot applications to people, which were not necessarily accurate. So I think that that's probably a pretty good idea. HB 1197 says it's to stop people from voting more than once, but it requires really significant election audit and comparing voter information of all voters to what's in the SURE system, which is the registry that the election officials use. What I think is really interesting and frankly kind of funny is for general elections, it also requires a comparison with voter information in bordering states. And I just think it's interesting to think that all the bordering states would be happy to engage in that process with us. And it also makes it a felony for a voter who votes in more than one state. And the last one here is a Poll Watcher Empowerment Act, which expands poll watcher eligibility and also their authority. I believe it says that anyone who is a citizen of Pennsylvania can be a poll watcher in any county. And it expands the penalties for election officials who hinder poll watchers up to $1,000 and 1 year imprisonment. I personally will no longer be an election official if that law passes. I think in a lot of cases for these bills, as well as the rest of the ones we're going to go over, the legislators don't understand the voting process or don't realize how impractical or burdensome their proposals are. And I think that there's a couple of examples on this page. These are the bills that I think increase access to voting. And again, there's certainly some duplication. The first one, and I guess I personally didn't realize this, but this writes into law that voters need to be able to register online. And that's not actually currently in any law in Pennsylvania. So that could be taken away by a future administration. So that writes it into law. There are two bills that provide for same-day voter registration. The only difference is one says that a voter who registers at the polling place can vote by regular ballot and the other by provisional ballot. In both cases, the bills say that the registration is subject to approval by the county, which has to happen within 7 days of the registration. So this is an example of a legislator that doesn't understand the process, because the bill, and it's Senator Bascola, who wants to permit same-day registration and voting by regular ballot. The problem with that is when a voter votes by a regular ballot, there is no way to attach that ballot to that voter. So if the registration is subsequently disallowed by the county, there's no way to know which ballot to disallow. So if you are going to do same day voter registration, it really needs to be a provisional ballot vote. I'm not going to go through all of these. There are a couple that provide for early in-person voting and pre-canvassing of ballots, which is probably one of the top issues that election officials are interested in. And I'll talk about that in just a second. A couple that changed the deadline for receipt of mailed-in ballots, the 3rd day after the election, the 6th day after election. Two of the interesting ones are about allowing independent voters to vote in primaries by choosing a party at the polls and either staying in that party or just doing it for that election to increase voter turnout in primaries. A couple that want to automatically send mail-in ballots to all voters, providing 2 hours of paid voting leave for an employee if they're unable to vote outside of work hours. That is the one exception. That's the bill that was sent to Labor and Industry rather than the State Government Committee. And a couple of bills that attempt to increase access for voters with disabilities. The second to last one on this list is one of the bipartisan ones, increasing the poll buffer space to 35 feet. That's the space that must be left between the door of the polling place and campaigning, where campaigning can take place. Right now it's 10 feet. And increasing it to 35 feet. I included that as one that would increase access to voting, because I think that voters are more comfortable when they can't have somebody pretty close to them who's campaigning or, well, let's just say campaigning. And the last one on this list permits non-elected government employees to serve as poll workers. They're currently technically, any government employee is technically not supposed to serve as a poll worker. I know exceptions have been made because we are so short of poll workers in Pennsylvania, but that is one that they're attempting to write into law. And the last group, this is one of the more difficult groups. It's either a bill that's got mixed in terms of having both restrictive and increasing access, or it's kind of neutral from a voter perspective. The first one states that voters must have the ability to cancel their permanent mail-in status online. Right now, in most counties, you have to call or contact your county, other than you can't just do it online. So I think that is probably a good thing to have that in there, but it doesn't really change voting access. The second one requires an auditor general audit of the 2020 election. So that's a backward-looking bill. I don't think it really impacts voters' access to the polls in the future. One that moves the presidential primary to the 3rd Tuesday in March so that Pennsylvania may actually have a say in who runs for president. The fourth one requires a faster system of removing deceased voters and those who have moved out of state from the polls. One of the resources I consulted when I was analyzing these is the Brennan Center for Justice, and they include this bill under their list of bills that are attempting to purge voter rolls. I don't really look at this one that way because it's limited to deceased voters and those who have moved out of state. I think the more troublesome voter roll purge bills are those that attempt to purge voters who have not voted for a certain number of elections. And we are indeed today removing from the voter rolls deceased voters and those who've moved out of state. This bill is just trying to get a faster system to do that. So I really don't view it as anything but a neutral one. HB 470 is, I think, the only bill that actually attempts to address the biggest concerns that election officials have. And their biggest concerns are the deadlines that went into effect in 2019 that pushed the registration deadline to 15 days before the election, and the deadline to apply for an absentee or mail-in ballot to 7 days before the election. Even though those are, I guess, allegedly or characterized as being voter friendly, they've created quite a few problems because it's simply more work than most county election bureaus can handle. And we all know about the concerns last year about mail-in ballots and how to, get the requests in on time and get the ballots done on time. So those are one of the big concerns for the election officials. So this bill returns the registration deadline back to 30 days before the election. And it moves the deadline to apply for an absentee or mail-in ballot to 21 days before the election. It also requires ballot drop boxes, at least one per 30,000 registered voters. Right now, whether or not there are ballot drop boxes is at the discretion of each county, and the county director of elections can make that decision. This bill also provides for pre-canvassing of mail-in and absentee ballots for 3 days before the election. Pre-canvassing is the number 2, or perhaps it's the number 1 request from election officials. We all remember the fact that Pennsylvania and many other states didn't really have final results for quite a few days after the 2020 election, because in Pennsylvania, the elections, county election offices cannot begin to count or to pre-canvass ballots, which means taking them out of the envelopes and getting them ready to scan. They can't begin that process until the day of election. So when, as I mentioned, we had 2.6 million mail-in ballots last year, and that's a lot of ballots to count if you're not starting till election day. This bill also prohibits curing of mailed ballots. If there's a problem with the signature, or any sort of problem with it, again, this is a practice in some counties and not all of them, but some of them will call the voter and say, hey, you forgot to sign your ballot, or there's some other problem with your ballot, and can you come in and fix it? This actually prohibits that. So this bill is a real mixed bag, which is why it's on the mixed or neutral list. And then the last two, the very last one actually also provides for ballot pre-canvassing. The second to last one says that candidates for president and governor must provide 5 years of income tax returns. So we have quite a lot of different things going on. There's a lot of bills to track. Three bills were just introduced this past Friday, so there are a lot of moving targets here. Jean talked about the process a little bit. With these bills, they are in the House and state government committees. It's pretty much up to the chairman of the committee and the members. The bill can die in committee. It can be voted out of committee. It can be voted down and not ever come out of committee. So a lot of things can happen. But if a bill does come out of committee, it can move very, very quickly. We've seen that happen in Pennsylvania, and it can literally be a matter of 3 days from the time a bill comes out of committee and it suddenly has become a bill that's going to the governor's desk. So I think that's why the League is very interested in tracking these bills and making sure that we know what's going on with them. I have the link there to the state legislature website. It's very easy. If any of these bills you want more information on, you want to understand it better prior to contacting your legislator, just go to that website, and there's a legislation quick search function up in the top right corner. You can enter the bill number that I have on my list, and that will provide you with a memo from the sponsoring legislator about the bill, which is usually a paragraph of propaganda from that legislator's standpoint. It will also provide you a link to the actual text of the bill, and it'll also give you the history of the bill when it was introduced and anything that has happened since. So as I said, the bills can move very, very quickly. So if you've seen anything on this list that you particularly like or dislike, this is the time to contact your legislator, especially if your legislator is one of the people that is on the House or State Government Committee. So any questions?
Yes, this is Freddie Player. Just one question. Has any of the county commissioners association, have they come online supporting or making a position on a lot of these bills?
I am not aware that they have. I know that some of them testified with the House State Government Committee hearings that have been held. I know that the two things that they are most interested in is pushing back those registration and mail-in ballot deadlines. And secondly, sorry, I'm drawing a blank. Oh, the pre-canvassing of ballots, moving that back so that they have more time to pre-canvass ballots. So I think any bills that include those, they would be in favor of. But I don't believe they've issued a position on any of these.
Thank you.
Jean, you're muted, I think.
Yeah. Carol, given the makeup of the legislature and the fact that we have a governor of the other party versus the majority parties in the legislature, what is the possibility of a lot of these, especially the more negative voting restriction bills, actually passing and becoming law?
Well, I think that certainly the governor, I mean, the bills as they stand today are, with the exception of the one that I talked about that was actually trying to address some of the issues, I think they're all pretty partisan, and the governor will veto any of those that he thinks is restricting voting access. So the question is whether or not that veto would be overcome. I think that having looked at it's the Republican State Leadership Committee website. I think that's what it's called. They have a special election committee with prototype laws and that sort of thing. And that group is pushing voter ID, signature matching. So I think that those are the most likely things to get through. And I think from comments that Seth Grove has made, I think those are the things that he is most interested in. So your guess is as good as mine on whether a veto can be overcome, but I think those are the biggest issues. I don't think that they'll actually pass anything to eliminate mail-in voting, because I think it's too popular, but they may try to make it, with signature matching and that sort of thing, make it more difficult, or try to put more requirements on it. The current buzz phrase that Seth Grove used it, and I noticed that it was on the Republican State Leadership Committee website, is make it easy to vote and hard to cheat. That is how they're describing their efforts now. But it's on the other hand, the Democratic bills, some of them would require resources that we simply don't have in Pennsylvania, like 30 days of in-person voting in advance. Other states do that, and they've had to ramp up to have the personnel and facilities available to do that. But I don't know that anything like that would certainly get through the legislature.
Thank you.
And any
So-
other questions? Sorry, go ahead.
I
Nick.
I have a question. So I was a little surprised to see that there wasn't a bill suggesting ranked choice voting.
Mhm. Nope,
Just not something there seemed to be.
not on the radar screen. No.
That's too bad. I think that the municipalities in the states that have tried it have been, I think, fairly pleased with the outcome.
Yeah, I would
So-
agree.
Yeah.
For
But-
those people who don't know what that ranked choice is, do you want to give a 15-word or less description?
Okay, so, and I probably know the buzzword better than I know the description, but the idea is that that each voter would be voting for a first option in a race, and then the second option, and then the third, and possibly more than that. But the idea then is that when votes are actually tabulated, your first priority vote counts, and if for some reason that candidate doesn't achieve, I guess, a majority or something that would be overwhelmingly causing that individual to win that race, they consider the second choice. And the idea there is that I guess when you have a first choice and a second choice, suppose if you had lots of different candidates, maybe a third choice, that you could automatically figure out which individual has the largest support, whether it's a first choice or a second choice from somebody, and that person would be the winner of the race. I think I've described that correctly.
That's how
If
I
I have it,
understand.
Carol,
That's how I understand.
Yeah.
And it-
But it basically gives, it doesn't force you into, choosing a single candidate over not voicing some preference for a secondary candidate. That's the benefit of it.
Other questions for Carol?
I have a question for Carol.
Yes, Nelson.
There seems to be a lot of interest in the proposed bills requiring a matching of signatures.
Mhm.
I know for myself, my signature can vary greatly depending on how the arthritis in my hands is that day. Are any of these bills proposing training the people on how to recognize variances in signatures? Or is it just, if somebody decides that's not your signature, too bad for you?
As I don't recall, Nelson, that any of the bills were specific about how the signatures be matched. It just says that the county, that the signature has to be verified. I know from what I have read that kind of the nonpartisan groups that have studied this recommend two things. One, that the best way to match signatures is to use software designed to do that. But the second best way is thoroughly trained signature observers. And that they also recommend that there be a cure period and a voter notification if there's a signature problem. But as I recall, I don't think any of these bills specify a training or a particular method to do it.
And Nelson, go ahead.
Just a quick follow-on question there. Do you know, are there any states that are doing an extensive signature match on mail-in ballots?
I believe there are, and some states actually keep on file several signatures of voters, because not only, today's arthritis, but my signature 15 years ago is not the same as my signature today. So I think there are states that do that. So it can be done, I think, fairly successfully, but the question always is, will Pennsylvania invest in the resources to do it the right way?
Okay, thank you.
Well, and Carol, I'm a judge as well, and you're a judge of elections, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it would be a nightmare. It would be a nightmare to try to validate for every single individual who came in, whether or not that signature was truly.
Well, I think,
exactly the
I
same.
think that the signature verification laws are for mailed ballots.
Yes, but technically when they sign in at the poll book, the poll worker should be verifying that signature. And I can't tell you the number of times I have usually an elderly person who has some palsy now in their hand, right? And or somebody who has had an accident and said, well, when I signed this, I was right-handed, but I don't have a right hand anymore. I have to, I had to learn how to write with my left hand. I mean, it just the circumstances under which you might have to verify a signature is so broad that it's. I would hope that some of these bills, talk a little bit more about the how, as Nelson was bringing up, because I don't think they've thought about that.
Right.
And the how, and I'll just throw in this a little bit of technology stuff from my personal background, right? The how, when you use software, it has everything to do with the force by which you pressure of your writing, right? That's one of the things that they look for in terms of, is somebody trying to fake your signature? The how you do the loops, how you dot your I's, you cross your T's, or all of that. I mean, there's some very sophisticated work if you were to really use software. And I mean, I think you're right. I think that the likelihood of that kind of investment is pretty low.
Yep.
Are there other questions for Carol? I want to make a point, and my techie person, if I'm saying something you can't do, you tell me that. But the PowerPoint that Carol did, because I doubt that all of you wrote down all of those bills and their numbers and what they said in that. We will put that PowerPoint presentation on our website under resources.
Yeah, probably resources. Yep. If I can attach it to a recording, I may do that under our work in action.
Okay.
Maybe
Hey, I'll send it to you again, because there have been a few updates since the last one I sent
original.
that's fine. That's fine. And I can make it into a PDF if you wanted to send me the original. In some ways, sometimes it's just easier for me to do it that way.
Oh, okay.
Okay, thanks.
So we will have that out within the next couple of days so that you can go there and reacquaint yourself with the ones that she went through to find those that may be particularly concerning to you that you do want to address with your legislature. And you do want to share with family, friends, other people other organizations that that might be interested in what's happening here. The whole kind of thing is there are an awful lot of them. And as Carol said, are they going to make it out of committee? And if they do make it out of committee, how quickly are they going to move? And then what's the governor going to do? So there's a whole lot of what ifs here along the way, but we wanted you to be aware of them because this whole thing about voting and the security around your vote and the potential for voter fraud has been a huge issue, as I'm sure you are all very well aware. And that's causing the legislature to take action. Potentially some good action, potentially some bad action. And we need to keep an eye on it, because if there are things that are going to suppress people's ability to vote, we don't want to see that happen. That's obviously a League of Women Voters mantra. We want everybody who is eligible, a citizen and of a certain age, we want them to be able to vote. So if there are no other questions, I want to thank all of you. We will let you know when the recording is available and the PowerPoint is out on our website. And thanks again to Jean, thanks again to Carole. And to reiterate on Jean's part, Wednesday, we'll see you at the Capitol steps if you're able to join us. Okay, thank you all. And good night.
Good night.
Good night.
I got a thumbs up from Sharon, whoever she is. Thank you. Okay, I'm ending this.